Hello, welcome to the MuseScore Café for today, Wednesday, July 31st, 2019. My name is Marc Sabatella. I'm the Director of Education for MuseScore, and this is my weekly series of informal interactive chats that I do. And I usually pick a topic to talk about and kind of give you some of my thoughts about it. We have a conversation if there's people checking out live, and I'm always up for answering random questions as well and taking suggestions for future topics. So the topic that I wanted to talk about today is about Chord. Include a couple of other things that are not just what chord symbols have done before. So one of the things that I've already talked about before was Roman numeral analysis that would be used in creating, educational materials or any sort of analysis you might want to do for whatever reason. And when I showed that before, it was just a font that I developed that would work with any program to do Roman numeral analysis. And that font I called Campagna. And that font, morning, hey. Yeah, glad to hear you're doing better, Colleen. The font is great and it's working. I'm getting good feedback on it, but we wanted to make it then possible to just use this within MuseScore without having to install a font and without needing to enter it as lyrics or, and not have to set up anything, but just have there be Roman numeral analysis as just a thing. So I want to show how that is going, because I think I've got that working the way I need it to work. So let me load a score here, and I'm going to use, the one that you all know I'm going to use, right? Mary had a little lamb. So there's an SATB version. I guess I'll just use that version here. And let's say I want to do some analysis on this. So what we can do is click a note and then go to the Add menu, Text, and you'll see Roman numeral analysis here. I've made it possible to have a shortcut to do it. I don't know that we'll give it a shortcut by default. We may or may not, but shortcuts are in kind of a short supply. But I've defined Control-Shift-R to be that shortcut. But now I can just type my Roman numeral analysis. And then when I press space, it works just like chord symbols. Space to move to the next note and so forth. And as you can see, these are not necessarily aligned right now, and that's because this one is automatic placement is avoiding the collision with this note. So if I want them to all really align, I should probably have set the default position of this to be lower. I don't know. That's something that I'll have to think about what the default position is, but I can certainly just increase it myself and make maybe 5 be the default. There we go, set as default, and now that's the default for all of them. So I can just go ahead and continue to do this. What did I say it was? Control-Shift-R for Roman numeral. And then this, I can enter, this is 5, it's 5, 7 of 6 is really what's going on. Anyhow, I can enter my Roman numeral analysis that way. So this is how it's going to work. It's going to look just like chord symbols as far as how you enter things. Space to move to the next note, or tab to move to the next measure. You'll also be able to enter like within a single chord, even though there's no notes there. If I forgot, there we go, Control-Shift-R. If I enter 1, I can then put a 6, and I'm just hitting space and it's moving to the next beat. You can also use control and a number, like Control-4 moves by half a beat, like an eighth note, just like it does eighth, because 4 is the shortcut for selecting an eighth note duration when entering notes. So you can enter basically the rules for entering this will work just like for chord symbols, except now they display below the staff instead of above the staff. So that's how Roman numerals will work. I've also now, and that's just using the Campagna font, a discussion that has just come up that I'm curious if anyone here has any input on, anyone who's watching this, either live or later, is about, I guess, apparently John Mahegan, who's a jazz theory writer, has invented his own notation in which the letter X is used to indicate a dominant seventh chord. So the classical notation for this would have been 5/7 of 6. The standard jazz notation would just be capital 3/7. Mahegan has a notation in which he notates it with an X. Well, as you see in Campagna, as soon as I enter the X, it thinks I'm on a double sharp, because that was the only uses of of X that I knew of. I wasn't familiar with Mahegan's system. So I guess what I'm going to try to figure out is to what extent I can reconcile this and let X do what it needs to do to enter double sharps where that's relevant, but also let it actually just show up as an X for if you want to build a used Mahegan system. So anyhow, that's the Campagna font is available. It's been available. Let me see if I've got the link handy. Of course I don't, but yeah, I'll post that link later. And you can try it out and tell me if there's anything else that seems like in the font itself, because the font is what's doing all the special magic of things like, well, you didn't see any of the special magic, but let's say I wanted this to be an inversion. I could type 6, I could type 6/4, and it automatically just displays everything the way it normally would. You can even then type -5/3 to have things like the resolution of suspensions and so forth. So I feel pretty good about the Roman numeral analysis. I just want to know if there's anything. Okay, I now know about the X is something I need to deal with. It was just pointed out that, yeah, the triangle is something that chord symbols support for major seventh, and I should probably support that in Campagna also, and I now do. I just added that support this morning, so it's not there in MuseScore yet, but I can show you that if I go to, here's my font designer program. If I type either T for triangle or the caret, because it kind of looks like a triangle, I get a triangle, but only there. So I can still type the letter T anywhere else, but T after a T is apparently a triangle. So yeah, T after a letter, a T after a letter basically will turn into a triangle. That will be there by the time we release this. Okay, so I want to talk about next is Nashville notation, which is another thing that I've added. And Nashville notation, I have to tell you, I've never used it. I worked with one musician who used it, and he kind of taught me some of the basics, and I've looked up online to learn some things about it, but it does come up as a request every once in a while. And Nashville notation is very much like other chord symbol notation, except instead of the root of the chord, instead of writing this as a G chord or a C chord, you put the number relative to the key, just like you do in Roman numeral notation, except you don't use Roman numerals, you just use ordinary numerals. So, and there's a couple other slight differences, like they don't, like in Roman numeral notation, 6 indicates an inversion, but Nashville notation will be more like regular chord symbol notation, where 6 means a sixth chord, not an inversion. So, I don't think the X is relevant today. Well, the X, apparently there are people who still use that. Mahegan was a very influential writer and thinker, even if his notation system maybe is quirky. There's been 2 requests for it already, so I feel like I want to figure out how to accommodate it. So yeah, this chord. Yeah, I was not really thinking, but you're right. It was 6/7, or and I could enter a second notation in here to give you the other thing. So So it really was not 5/7 of 6, but 5/7 of 2. Yeah, I'm not thinking about theory. I'm just thinking about the mechanics of the font right now. But yeah, good call. I had labeled that chord incorrectly. All right, so Nashville notation would look something like this. So I'm going to use Control-Shift-N as my shortcut for Nashville notation. Again, that may or may not be the final shortcut. Maybe you'll have to define it yourself. But so for Nashville notation, this is just a 1. And then again, the space bar and tab and everything is going to work. And that is just a 4. And this is just a 3. And the idea in Nashville notation is you just enter a number if the chord is diatonic. Only if the chord contains any sort of alterations do you need to indicate anything special about it. So you don't do anything to say that 4 is major and 3 is minor, because it's just expected that we know this. For the 6 chord, I'll enter a 6, but then you can enter a symbol to say, well, I want a major 6 chord, not the regular minor 6 chord. And so depending, and here's where, again, when I look online, I see all sorts of different things, so I realize that everyone has their own version of this. You can use a capital M. Some people use the T for triangle. And, because this isn't using Campagna font, if I enter the T, you're not going to see the triangle right away, but as soon as, just like chord symbols, as soon as I finish the entry of that chord symbol, you'll see it turn into a triangle. Or you might just say it's a 7th chord, 6, 7, and then that will be understood to be a dominant 7th. So that is the basics of Nashville notation, and unfortunately the basics is all I really know, what I've been able to read online and what I remember from what Michael Olson, if Michael, I should point Michael to this video, and then you can tell me what else I forgot that you ever told me about. I know you use your own kind of unique take on Nashville notation, but from what I understand, everyone has their own unique take. So anyhow, Nashville notation is something also now that we will be supporting as part of this. The other thing that I guess I want to show you about what I'm doing with chord symbols is adding some additional customization for the chord symbols themselves. So if I enter this, I'm just going to lie about some of these chords. I'm going to say that this is G major 7, and I'm going to say that that's C6, and I'll say that this is B minor 7 flat 5, even though none of those are actually true. So this is what it looks like by default in MuseScore. If you use the jazz style, well, in fact, let me just switch to the jazz style. When you switch to the jazz style for chord symbols, you will see that this changes to a handwritten font. So handwritten font here, and also the superscripting happens here. Now I just noticed changing the jazz style also affected, I meant for it to affect the Nashville notation. I did not mean for it to affect the Roman numeral notation. This should have stayed Campagna, so I obviously need to figure out what I did there. Anyhow, let me go back to standard style. So the jazz style has all this neat, when we go back to jazz for a second, it's got all this neat things like, superscripting of the 7 and the 6, and then additional superscripting. There's the 7 superscripted, but then the flat 5 is superscripted even more so. People have been wondering, could we get that without needing to switch to the jazz style? Because maybe they just want to use their own font, because the jazz style only works with the MuseJazz font. Well, I've now added settings for this. So here you can see I can change the extension scaling, meaning the size of the extension. So this affects the 7, the 6, and the 7 here. So if I downsize that, you see those get smaller. And then the vertical offset, then I will just raise them. And then the flat 5, well, that's not extension. I call that the modifier. It's an alteration, but it's also going to apply to other things. So I can make that smaller, and I can make it the same size as the extension, or I can make it a little smaller, which is what the jazz style does. And then I can raise it, and I can either make it the same height as the extension, or I can do like I did in the jazz style and raise it up a little bit higher. So now you'll be able to have that kind of formatting without needing the jazz style and without needing to edit this XML file, which has always been what we've told people before. We say, oh, I really want to do this, I really want to do this. Like, okay, there's an XML file and you can learn the syntax and learn how to edit it, but you will still need to do that if you want to do anything fancier, but I think this will cover a lot of useful cases for people. So that's something else that's coming with chord symbols. When I say it's coming, I mean I'm still working on the code, but it's feeling pretty good. You're seeing it work. I need to figure out why the Roman numerals changed font, even though I'm sure there's a simple reason why that happened that I can fix. The other thing, though, that's going on, and this isn't my work, this is a Google Summer of Code student, Peter. I don't suppose you're watching, Peter. I would love to be able to pronounce your last name correctly. I'll say Peter Vu, and I don't know if I'm, because I'm leaving out a portion of the name. But Peter has been working on the playback of chord symbols, and my goal is then to merge his changes with my changes so that the Nashville notation will also play back. Roman numerals probably won't, because the whole principle of how they work is different enough that I don't expect that that's going to be a thing. But so this is my code here that we've been looking at that does this. Now I need to switch over to Peter's code so that I can show you what that might look like. So if I go to Peter's version of MuseScore, his is also work in progress, but is coming along quite nicely. I'm going to do a super quick Mary Had a Little Lamb here, rather, because I think I can enter the notes. Oops. Yeah, I gotta wait for it to finish starting up. I can enter the notes faster than I can. Do I have the sound off? Yes, I do. Okay. Here, rather, because I think I can enter the notes. Yeah, I gotta wait for it to finish starting up. I can enter the notes faster than I can. Do I have the sound off? There we go. Okay, so I since I had myself open in another window, I didn't want to get any nasty feedback. So I'm sorry if anyone heard any there, but hopefully, if so, it's gone now. All right. Since I'm in the key of G, of C for this one, I'm just doing it in C, even though I had it in G before. All right. So here's my melody. And obviously when I play it, you just hear the melody. Now let me enter my chords. C, F, and I'm transposing what I remember. This was an A7 because I'm transposing. And then this was basically an A flat, 7 sharp 11, G7. And then C, D minor 7, G7, something like that. All right, you ready? There you go. So, good work, Peter. So that's all there is to it. You enter the chords and it plays them. It's really as simple as that, if that's all you want. We can definitely do more than that, but it will be that simple to just hear your chord symbols played back. But there is some customization available. All of a sudden, very blurry. That's a good question. So the image of the score itself is blurry. Is anyone else seeing that? I mean, I did just play with my sound. It's hard for me to see what else I could have done. Let me just go full screen, take me off, and see if just me changing the signal I'm sending changes anything. So hopefully, I don't know, hopefully that's better. If not, I apologize. Again, when you play it, it just plays. Now, there's some settings, though, that you can make. So here in the inspector, you'll see, first of all, I can set them to not play, and I can make that be a style setting apparently. So if I'd say don't play this and then set as style, assuming this works correctly, I didn't try this yet. Okay, good. So I guess the video is good. Glad to hear that. All right, so here's my C. I'll turn the playback on and set as style again. Let's listen to the voicings. So those are just the default voicings for C, F, E minor 7, and A7. There's some settings though here. Let me just select those 4 chords. And I'm going to say here under voicing, that's the auto style. Oh, root only. Okay, let's see what that one sounds like. There you go. How about one of the other ones? Let's try drop 2. You know, if you're not too familiar with these and actually drop 2 on triads is not very impressive. It's more impressive as you get to more complicated voicings. A 3-note voicing, so now this will be a thinner sounding voicing. And so there you go. It's choosing, like the 3-note voicing for A7. I believe the algorithm was sophisticated enough to realize that, okay, if you got a 7th chord and you're only going to play 3 notes, leave out the 5th. That's the note to leave out. The root, the 3rd, and the 7th are the most important notes. Now, ideally, maybe it would also look at the melody and go, oh, if the melody is the root, then no, you don't want to skip the root, though. You want the root in the bass. So anyhow, those are some of the different voicing choices. But beyond that, there's another thing. So let me... So I guess there's no set as style, unless the set as style button is for both of those. I'm not actually sure, to be honest. Actually, let's find out. Let's set this to root only and then see if that made all of them be root only, including the ones I didn't select. Yep, okay, so the set as style applies to both of the settings. I just learned that. Okay, it's... probably could be maybe centered a little more here to make that clear. I'll pass that on to Peter. All right, let's go back to auto, in which it tries to make its own choice. But there's this other cool thing that's going to happen when I switch to the jazz interpretation. The jazz interpretation is going to do what a jazz musician would do and add 6ths and 9ths and color tones and so forth. So let's hear what that sounds like now. Oh, I didn't hit set as style. Oh, so we got to hear the cool chord here, but we didn't get to hear anything else. So set as style. Here we go. So there you have it. That's the basics of how the chord symbol playback facility works. It just works by default. You can tweak a couple things here in the inspector, but the other thing you can do that could be useful is what if you don't particularly care for, you want to play around with this and you want to adjust some of the voicings or otherwise. I'm going to add a staff and I'm going to take these chord symbols and we select them all. Cut them from here, paste them here. All right, what I'm going to do now is select all those chord symbols and realize chord symbols. What that does is now gives me a dialog where it's going to, I think it's going to default to using the voicings that were set here. Show More has got some additional options here. That's showing me very specifically what these voicings are going to be. But if I just pick realize chord symbols and then OK, it actually puts them on the staff for me. So if I look at this A7 here and say, oh, that's nice, but I really wish that had been, instead of a B natural, a B flat. And because the rule for it in the jazz style currently, the rule is it will add a ninth to the dominant seventh chord. It'll make it a flat 9 if the next chord is minor. If you can think about the theory of this, that's because if the next chord was D minor, basically, B flat is in the key of D minor, and that is the thinking behind making flat 9s on dominant seventh chords, resolving down a fifth to minor chords. So the algorithm is smart enough to know that. Here, though, we outsmarted the algorithm because this is a tritone substitution, and so we didn't get to see the D minor. So in any case, it didn't know to make the B flat there. But boy, I really want the B flat. Well, that's okay. What I do is I create another staff, I use the realized chord symbols, and then I just change that note, and now I've got what I want. And so that's that. And probably if I do that, I'm going to get rid of that A up there also, because I don't really need the A doubled right below the flat 9. Why C sharp? Not sure why. Felt like I heard a dissonance I didn't expect to hear, but I'm not sure why, because the B flat should have sounded. Yeah, I don't know. My ear's playing tricks on me or something. I'm not going to worry about it. But so you can play with the voicing once by generating it, by using that realized chord symbols to generate them onto another staff. And then you can also do things like play with the rhythms, right? I can make this be an eighth note, or I can cut that eighth note and paste it here so I get a little syncopation out of it. And now that I've done that, I might want to lengthen it again. So I can do all sorts of playing around with the rhythms to make the accompaniment be, more interesting. Eventually, probably there will be some feature in there to make that process easier, maybe even make it automatic. But for now, at least just having the chord symbol playback, like right out of the box, not having to do a thing, you enter your basic chord symbols and it works. I think that's going to go a long ways towards making just a lot of things work a lot better. Like I've been in the habit when I create arrangements, big band arrangements and so forth. With lead sheets, I don't even care. I just play. I can play a lead sheet on the piano myself. But if I'm working on an arrangement and I want to play back the arrangement, and then there might be a section where the accompaniment is just rhythm section. There's no trombones or trumpets or saxophones accompanying a melody. I'll want to hear the arrangement, what it's supposed to sound like there. So I'll go ahead and enter chord voicings in the piano part and then make them invisible. I'll make an invisible piano staff. So I'm not going to need to do that anymore. I'm really looking forward to that, being able to hear these sections of my arrangements without needing to actually enter voicings. But I think for many people, what it does with lead sheets is going to be especially useful. So as an example of that, I do want to show you, so people who have been around MuseScore for a while may recall the demo score that I had written back in the day. Okay, so this piece, Reunion, was the demo score for MuseScore for several years. Like every time you first started MuseScore, this is what you would see instead of a blank screen. And so I wrote this to show off as many features of MuseScore as possible. That was the whole goal. But I also, of course, wanted it to sound like music. And it ended up being kind of a nice little tune, and it was pretty popular. People really liked it. And so I ended up creating a lead sheet version of it, which just extrapolates the melody from that piece. If we look at it, you see, right, there's just the melody, and here's just the melody. but with chord symbols. So this is the lead sheet version. So if I've already set this one to be jazz, auto's fine. So here's what this one sounds like just by setting the style to be jazz and just playing from the lead sheet. And there you have it. So that's just an example of a lead sheet now that for a piece that's actually was written to use jazz chords and so forth. They're actually fairly simple chords, but it works with fairly arbitrarily complex chords. It knows how to handle alterations and things like that. Peter did a really good job with this. Anyhow, that's something you can look forward to. There's not a particular schedule that I'm aware of, but I do know the Google Summer of Code project wraps up in the next couple of weeks, so Peter's going to be finishing up his coding, and then we'll, do some more testing and fix any bugs that need to be fixed. And there's other students working on their own projects for Google Summer of Code, and I will highlight their work probably later. I wanted to focus on Peter's along with mine because they're all related to the subject of chord symbols. I might focus on some of the other projects either on their own or in combination with other things that they are sort of working together with. But anyhow, all the Google Summer of Code work that is going to be usable, that because sometimes some of it's a little more experimental, but some of it's like ready to go. The stuff that's ready to go, my assumption is it's going to be done within the next month, and therefore would be able to be merged into the code in September, and so probably there would be another release coming around then, sometime in the fall. I don't know that we have a formal schedule figured out yet, but the selection rectangle. Selection rectangle only an unstable? No, I'm not sure what you mean by that. Selection rectangle. Nope, sorry, not sure what you mean. Because this, what I did, clicking a measure, I think I also shift dragged to select chords. No, that's been in MuseScore since day one. So that's shift drag is what I'm doing here. Shift drag. Will select things. It's a little finicky because if there'd been a note sticking up there, it would have tried to select that as well. But occasionally, it's a useful thing. So maybe that's what you're talking about, Martin. So anyhow, I would expect the chord symbol playback, of course, is only going to work in whatever this version is. You could create a score in MuseScore in whatever that version. We'll call it 3.3, whether or not that's really what it is, but probably. So we'll say MuseScore 3.3. If you create a score in 3.3, the chord symbols will play back, but then you go back to MuseScore 3.2 and they won't play back anymore. But if you use that realize chord symbols option, like I did wherever I did it here, then if you save this score, well then these are now just regular notes, and MuseScore 2, MuseScore 3.2 will be just as happy to play these chords. So there's a couple of the other features I think that are coming that also will kind of require that sort of backwards compatibility thing where, you can use this feature in 3.3, but those scores, they'll still load in 3.2, but the new feature won't be there. So I think that's the case with one of the other projects as well. And like my Roman numeral analysis code, same story. If you create Roman numeral analysis in 3.3, that score, you can load it into 3.2, but those elements just will, I don't even know what they'll display like. I haven't even thought about that. I'm a little afraid to find out. But now, since my own curiosity gets the best of me, let's find out. I'm going to guess they're going to show up as very ugly looking chord symbols. Either that or it's going to crash, and I will need to fix that if so. Let's find out what happens. And the answer is they look like just chord symbols. There you go. So yeah, that's actually not a bad result, because they are actually, the Roman numeral analysis are just chord symbols. They're just chord symbols that happen to render using that Campagna font, and so now the Campagna font isn't built in 3.2. Okay, glad I was able to answer your question, Martin. The Nashville notation, though, shows up just like the number part is missing. Remember, this was, well, this is not the file, but this was a 6T, this was a 6-7, or something like that. Anyhow, if you create Nashville notation in 3.3 or whatever version is going to have it, and then you try to load that into 3.2, it's not going to look right. But apparently the Roman numeral notation looks just fine. I would just have to set the font to be Campania. So if I do that, that's Cambria. Campania. There we go. So, it wouldn't take a whole lot of work to get Roman numeral analysis to look right, even loading in an older version. So anyhow, the point is, probably this fall you will be able to actually have your hands on these features. Some of it might be merged into the master build. So if you're into downloading the nightly builds and testing, you'll probably be able to test some of this code sooner than that. But I would guess sometime in the fall is when you'll be seeing this. So that is what I've got for you today. As far as other topics to cover, one suggestion I just got today was there's some new plugin capabilities that have just been added to the master build within the last week or so, and some pretty exciting abilities to write plugins that control other aspects of playback. So there will be some really interesting plugins coming to tweak the playback of articulations and things like this, and ornaments. So I'll want to show that off at some point soon. And I think next week I do want to highlight accessibility, because I've mentioned a couple times that I've worked with some blind students. I'm going to be doing that this fall, and I've been working on some features to make MuseScore more usable for blind musicians, and one of the Google Summer of Code projects is touching on that as well. So I'm hoping to get a usable version of that code to show off, as well as some of the stuff that I've done, as well as just give you an idea of what it's like to use a software program, MuseScore in particular, but what it's like to use a computer as a blind person, and get y'all thinking about some of those issues. And then if you have any input into what we could be doing for MuseScore specifically, definitely looking for any input on how to improve things. So those are some of the upcoming topics, and as always, I'm up for your suggestions. So I hope you've found something of interest here in what I showed with chord symbols, whether it's the Roman numeral analysis or the Nashville notation that was most exciting, or just the ability to format chord symbols or the playback of them. Those are some of the things that we're working on right now. So I will actually next week I will be here. It's possible I will then take a week or two off. I'm going to be out of town, but there's no reason I can't actually broadcast from where I'm at. So we're definitely open for suggestions. I'm open for suggestions for what I cover in the cafe, as well as we're always open to suggestions for MuseScore itself. And being an open source software, if anyone decides, hey, that's really useful, I think I'd like to implement that suggestion, then we go for it. But yeah, for me personally, I really enjoy getting suggestions for topics to cover, because then it saves me from having to think of them and then worry about whether anyone cares. So I think I will sign off and talk to you all next week. See ya.